Okay, we're recording.
Okay, good.
So what do you guys have?
How you doing? Cocktails and
I
episode
Yep.
2. All right, let's see.
Oh, two.
I brought a couple of special ones, so I'm not sure which one I'm going to have. It's both are from the Asbury. No, you can't see it. From the Asbury Park Distilling Company, which is a local distillery in.
What if you put it in front of your face? Does the focus work on that? That's better. Yep, you can see it. There you go. Asbury Park Distilling.
Asbury Park
Yep,
Distilling. So I have vodka and bourbon. What should I go for here?
bourbon.
Bourbon.
Yeah,
Bourbon it is.
on that one.
Jeremy, what do you have?
I have a Midwinter Nights Dram. It's a blend of straight white whiskey, High West.
Nice.
Well, you guys are all kinds of fancy. I have a margarita.
Cheers, guys.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Tron, there's the Mango Farm glass. Thank you very much.
Nice. I like it.
Tron made that for me.
Very nice.
Okay, cocktails and crypto. So
In fairness, not the glass, just the logo that went up. Yeah.
so what's new
Well,
in crypto land?
did you all I wanted to see if you guys watched Eric Voorhees' keynote at
Yes.
Coin.
That was
What
incredible.
do you think of that?
No, I didn't see it.
That,
Tell me.
Okay,
you have
recap.
to watch it.
Yes, recap. It's 20 minutes long, and he does fantastic keynotes. We've watched other ones. This one, he so clearly laid out, in my opinion, the ethos behind what it is that we're doing in crypto. And it was almost like a rallying cry, but not like a loud, boisterous one. It was one based purely on logic and reason.
Yeah.
He goes through and describes like, this is the fight that we're fighting, and breaks it down in such a clear way that it was absolutely inspiring to me.
That's great.
Yep. Yeah, it was great. You should watch it.
Where was it, guys?
I was posted on Twitter. I saw it on Twitter, and it was about roughly a week ago.
Okay, I'll check it out.
So what he does, which I thought was so interesting, he basically says, hey, our fight of the creation of the United States of America was a fight against centralization, where you had the king was like the owner of his subjects. You had in religion, you had a priest who was the intermediary between you and God, and a king who was there like over you. And he's like, so we disintermediated, the Protestant movement disintermediated the priest to God. Like a person could directly communicate with God, right? And that was the foundation and the roots of liberty of the United States. And that idea continued to spread that, hey, wait a second, do we need even a king? How about we decide what our government is, right? And he lays that out of saying it's the exact same fight in crypto, where we need to disintermediate, quite frankly, government. Instead of separation of religion and government, we have separation of government and money. And that's the next thing, is a disintermediation there. And that's what this fight ultimately is about. And it is so, he lays it out so clearly. Like I said, it's so inspiring. It was great. I've actually listened to it several times, and it reminds me, again, I came into this movement based upon my libertarian background, quite frankly. My libertarian roots are what got me into crypto. I was a big gold bug, and I'm like into gold because, it was sound money, and I had all the Murray Rothbard and Austrian economics schooling on all of that. And then when I found Bitcoin, and I actually was in like this like gold group as well, we would talk about gold and like everything, like we were really into like why this was so important. And when I discovered Bitcoin, like, it has all the properties of gold, but also some of the things that are kind of the downside of gold, like how do you store it? It's not very easily divisible, for example, can't transport it easily. It's hard to secure. I mean, all of these things, all of a sudden, Bitcoin is like, wait a second.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Like Bitcoin actually solves a lot of these. So I would go to my little gold group, and I'm like, hey, Bitcoin guys, like, and no one else was like getting it. And I'm like, am I wrong here? Cause like, am I wrong? I'm like, I'm going to get rid of all my gold, which I did at the time, got rid of all my gold at the time, and converted into Bitcoin. And they all thought I was crazy, but the thing about it is, to me, it, going back to Eric Voorhees and his talk, it just, communicates like the ethos behind this fight that we're fighting. And it's inspiring. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, that's all. I mean, that's awesome. I have to watch it because I'm interested in sort of those long historical arcs and the whole sort of notion. I agree with the notion that, you know, we are on I wouldn't call it a march. There's a struggle that seems to be tending towards disintermediation over time, but that's not necessarily the case. It's not ineluctable that that's going to happen, right? You know, and you've got big counterbalancing forces like communism and socialism and those sorts of things that sort of there's a never-ending fight. But hopefully we do end up, because I'm, you know, tend to be a libertarian in my philosophy, tending towards the removal of intermediaries in all we do.
Yeah. I'm just looking up interlectable. So
Ineluctable. Yeah, that was a
Well,
5 word, wasn't it?
the other thing
Yeah.
that he said, and Doug, this I think is right up your alley. The other thing he said, which I thought was really interesting, he said, this fight has to occur here in the United States. Like the fight will happen here and it will end here because we are the only system that has the philosophical roots to fight this actual fight.
I agree with it.
So this is the place where it has to happen. And we're on the battleground now. That was, again, hadn't really thought of it in those terms, but he's totally right. Totally right.
Well, look, interesting things can come from unexpected places, right? You know, back in 1789, right? We were the sort of out there little backwater community that created this sort of font of democracy or republicanism, I guess you could call it, right? And nobody expected it. They weren't looking at the United States back then as, you know, the country that it would become. It was a little backwater, right? So who knows? I mean, maybe places like El Salvador, you know, maybe places like Argentina, right? We might get a surprise out of, you know, Argentina in particular, you know, countries that have vast resources but have been under the thumb of sort of centralized socialist governance structures and monetary systems, right? I mean, because I always found this fascinating that in the United States of America, where we are, you know, a democracy or a quasi-democracy, but we do believe in principles of freedom. We are a capitalist society, or at least a modified capitalist society, getting less and less so over time, but we still have capitalism at our roots, and it's what made us one of the greatest economic engines in the world, in the history of the world, right? We put a command economy at the center of our capitalist society. Our money is a centrally controlled Soviet-style command economy, fixed by a group of people sitting around a conference room table.
Yep.
Makes no
Interest
sense.
rate should be set by the market, right? I mean, as savings grows, then, you know, then you have more capital and when it shrinks, you need to pay higher interest rate. That number, that interest rate should be able to set itself. We don't have that.
I love, you know, sort of thinking about how the hell did we get here? I mean, if there's evidence of a slippery slope, that's it. Right? Because we've cracked into a scenario in which, you know, our money is being debased at a level that has never been seen in the history of humanity. Every day, right? And how did we get here? From a society that prides itself on sort of free markets and capitalism. How did we get to a point where there's, you know, a conference room in Washington, D.C., and they establish for us what the price of the most important commodity in our existence, financial existence, is, which is money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's astounding to me, and we don't even question it. And people who were born, you know, after we were, I mean, I was at least born in 1974, so, you know, the early era of my life involved a little bit of, you know, understanding about, you know, what money was like on a gold standard, right? You know, my parents and grandparents lived under a gold standard. Kids today, they have no idea. They think this is just the way that human history has always been and always will be.
Well, and the thing about the gold standard was it put a constraint on the ability of governments to inflate our money supply.
Yeah.
And when we took that off, then it's like, oh, all reins come off, you know. And have you heard of MMT, modern monetary theory?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, people, and when I first heard that, the idea is, why do you even collect taxes, right? The government just prints the money it needs because it's the one who has the power to do so, essentially, like through the central bank, it does it. Printing treasuries, the central bank buys the treasuries, and funds itself that way. Why do we even need taxes, right? And at first I thought that is ridiculous. Who would ever do that? And then I realized, like, wait, that's actually, I think, the system we're living in already. It's already here. It's already been happening for a long time.
It is, but this
Yeah.
is the whole Cantillon effect, right? So the beneficiaries of the largesse of government creation of our monetary instrument, right? It doesn't fall evenly on the distribution.
Nope.
Yeah.
Closest to the faucet.
Closest to the faucet, right? So that's the Cantillon effect. And I mean, it's not really buying treasuries anymore. They just mark up bank balance sheets. That's pretty much commercial bank balance sheets is how money gets made. And the famous quote, we just press the button and mark up the balance sheets, right? But they're the ones who get the benefit, which is why if you look, right, at any city in America, right, if you walk downtown in any city in America, what are the two buildings that have the most imposing facades with the marbled structures and the big brass doors and all that? It's one of two things in every case. It's a bank or it's a government building.
Yeah.
Right? The two groups that control that monetary supply.
So they have the money to do that, but they also need to inspire trust, right? And they need you to think, oh, this is a solid, rock solid foundation.
I make a joke in my class that I have pull up a facade of a bank in like a Hollywood set. And and I have two pictures. One is the front of it, and then once you look behind it, and it's nothing, right? Because it's a Hollywood set. But in reality, that's what a bank is. A bank is just a box in which we put our money and hope that we're going to get our money back out when we ask for it. That's it.
But that's what most people don't understand, though. They kind of like think, oh, it's my money, and they're holding it. And then you find out, well, that's not. I mean, after SVB and some of these things, you realize that's not really how it works. It's like you've turned it over, and you may or may not get it back.
Absolutely. Look, for insured deposits, that's one level, right? I mean, the government insures them and you're pretty much guaranteed to get it back. That's why we have FDIC insurance. But if you think that money in the bank is as good as money in the bank, ask anybody who was over that FDIC limit in Lehman or any commercial lenders to Lehman. I mean, they're still litigating Lehman cases from 2008.
Really?
Yeah. An unsecured obligation of a bank is basically the equivalent of a bankruptcy claim.
Yeah. And the thing about it is, like, so we had COVID, right? When that happened, our money supply went up crazy, right? But it happened under both Trump and Biden. And that's the thing. It's like, where do you go? I don't think there's a party that quite frankly represents that, hey, let's have a little more discipline around this. I know they say they do, but if you look at the actual numbers, they don't. Neither one of them do. And so to me, it's like, if you're a voter, what are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to vote for a candidate who's actually going to try to control this? Or is it just beyond control at this point?
Well, I think we have parties like that, but they're not the ones that are like shoveling out money to their potential voters, right? So they're very, very small parties, and we basically have a two-party system. Some of the other countries have a different system, right? Where there's lots of different things you can vote for. So you can kind of throw your weight behind, the green movement or behind this or whatever, and then they all have to work together and kind of negotiate something. So it's a little different than our system. And so for ours, the ones that aren't shoveling money out, they're not really viable parties in our current system.
To me,
back to your tax thing. I have heard that printing money and taxing are basically kind of Ricardian equivalents. There's just they're both just kind of taking from you, right? So
yeah, one is more overt when you see how much you paid, and the other is
you have to write a check, right? Or you see it
you have is slowly being whittled away. Yeah,
that's right. And we have both, right? They're just being added together in whatever ratios they choose to print/tax.
Well, we are, if you think about this, in the span of time in which we, the three people on this Zoom call, have known each other, the dollar has debased itself, or it has been debased over 50%. That's insane.
Yeah, no, but it feels like it when you go to the store or to home insurance or to the gas station or to,
Look, it feels to me, something feels odd, and it has felt odd since COVID. Something isn't right about this economy, right? It feels to me as though we don't have, I was shocked to hell when COVID happened and, most of the economy was shut down. And it was almost like nothing really happened economically, right? I don't know what the percentage was, but half, 2/3 of Americans were sitting in their house and nothing really changed. We didn't have an economic cataclysm, right? It was sort of a bump in the road. And it just feels like we're living on a sugar high.
Yeah.
For,
Oh, yeah.
Going on a decade now, maybe just under a decade. And
I mean, you can do it personally. You can do it personally for a while, right? You can just be like, hey, I've got a credit card. I can go, drive whatever car, drive, whatever, buy stuff, owns whatever for a time. And then it catches up with you.
Well, I'm not going to name names, but I know someone personally who lives a lifestyle that's nicer than the lifestyle my wife and I work. And like, we've never been late on a bill. And this person hasn't paid a bill in the entire time period we've known them. So, sure, you can do that. But
but won't it catch up with them?
I think so eventually, but can a government, right? Governments
Yeah.
and it's just this major experiment we're living through just in our lifetime, right? It didn't exist this way before. And it just feels like an experiment, and it really feels like they have no idea what they're doing.
Agree.
I don't care how learned you may be, right? You can't manage an economy. No group of people can manage an economy. That's why capitalism works, right? And why socialism fails, because you just can't plan for every contingency in an economy. Even with the computational resources that we have today, it still can't be done. And yet they're doing it, and they seem to be doing it only in one direction, just more and more and more money. Pump more money into the system, even when they consider it to be rate hikes and, reductions in the money supply, it's not really a reduction. It's a net increase that exceeds the increases that we had for decades before. And it just feels weird.
Yeah. Speaking of another thing, switching topics a little bit, the other one you ought to watch if you haven't seen it is Tucker interviewing Bukele. That one's worth watching.
Seen that.
You haven't seen that one?
No.
You should watch that one too. It's also really good.
But like Elon had a great quote the other day that money's just a database. And like, I've always thought of gold that way. I don't think many people actually do think of gold this way, but gold is just a database when you think about it, because there's a limited supply. And this, I have a ring on my finger. It's a sign of my enduring wealth. My wife and I exchanged them when we were married, right? And this is sort of my share of the world's gold supply that I brandish about to show people that I have a little chunk of that gold. I mean, and you can fit all the gold that's ever been mined in history in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, so it's not a lot. And I got a little piece of it. This is 0.00001% of it sitting here on my finger. And if you think of the total supply of gold as the ledger, and the amount that I possess on my finger as my share, that's how you debit and credit in a decentralized way. And that's why nation states use gold for so many years, because they could do what you had in your vault, nobody could take away unless they had enough tanks and guns to do it.
Yep.
Bitcoin is the electronic equivalent of that, in a way.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have, Jeremy, as you said, like a lot of the downsides of gold. You don't have to, stick it in a hole in the ground and pay somebody to watch it, like that's the Warren Buffett quote. And it's easy to transport. It doesn't, you don't need an airplane or a train to do it, or a Wells Fargo truck. But like it's very much the same concept. And I personally think it's inevitable that nation states will start with little countries like El Salvador, but eventually nation states will start to accumulate this asset, very much like they have the vault in the Federal Reserve in downtown New York, where that vault is, they take a pallet of gold from one country and they move it into another, and that's a debit and a credit and a ledger. Right? We're gonna get there, whether it's Bitcoin or not. I can't predict, because a lot of nations don't, don't fully appreciate Bitcoin yet, but I think it's definitely possible. We just have to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yep.
going to be like, what will the transition if something like that were to happen? Like, let's say we were to go to a system that is what is deemed sound money. Sound money, by the way, the background of that is they would literally take a piece of gold and hit it and on a tin, and if it made a certain kind of noise, they could tell that it was real, and that's where the term sound money came from. Anyway, a long time ago. But how does that transition if we were to go to something like that? What would that even look like? I think it would be very messy. I think it would not happen smoothly. I think it would not something quite frankly that I want or would want. Like it's gonna, I think it won't be a smooth process if that were to happen. But to me, so when I look at like Bitcoin, to me, it's like insurance. It's like insurance that quite frankly, I wish I didn't have to feel like I needed to get, but feel like I do because of the situation we're in.
Well, it's a hard asset, like land, like other things, right? That's how I view it. I mean, the notion that we are in our lifetime going to end up on a Bitcoin standard where nation states are actually using it for their currency without their own fiat, I just don't think I don't think it's possible, right? It would have to get really bad first, Argentina style bad, for nations to ever want to do that, because things aren't bad. We have a great economy in the United States. It's the engine of the world's economy. And our worst day of inflation really wasn't all that bad. I mean, we're not talking about Polish shock therapy levels of inflation. We're talking about less than 10%. So but on an individual basis, there are very few assets where you can put your money and know, or at least believe, that over time, they will have a counter-inflationary result, and Bitcoin seems to be one of them.
100%
Yep.
agree. So when that interview with the president of El Salvador, what was it that stood out to you?
To me, it was just so in my view, it was kind of his character, right? He just basically said, that democracy needs maintenance, and he kind of pointed out the West, has kind of not maintained that, and it kind of needs that, and he told the story of how they ended up rounding up everybody, and they said, they went from the worst murder, highest murder rate, least safe country in the world, to the most safe in the Western Hemisphere. It's safer than the U.S. as far as kind of murders per 100,000 people. It's like from U.S. at like 6 or something like that to theirs, which is now 2.4. So just so like a per capita, not just like the number of, but kind of a per capita number. And just he just it really is a great interview. He kind of talks about how they did it, and what they needed to do, and what they're continuing to do, and to root out corruption, and he said that he got a lot of flack from almost every country, and lots of organizations and stuff, but they kind of have the track record, and so it was it's pretty interesting. He says now he has countries in that kind of that same level kind of coming to him and saying, what how can we do the same thing, and other countries looking at him, and he took a lot of flack, and but then there were people that were saying he's violating the constitution of their country and all that kind of stuff. He said we just aren't, right? And he said, well, how long are you going to be in power? And he said, well, 5 years. That's all, it's kind of all I have left under our constitution and stuff. So I mean, there was a lot in there, but it's worth watching. Yeah.
I mean, that's we had a little bit of a mini example of that in New York in the transition from Mayor Dinkins to Mayor Giuliani back when I used to go to school in New York. And a lot of people don't love Rudy Giuliani now, but let me tell you something.
They did.
Then he was America's mayor, and he was named that for a reason. because New York dramatically changed, visibly and dramatically changed from an unsafe place where you felt skeevy walking down Times Square, and it was just it was a pit, into like Disneyland, right? So it
Yeah.
just takes a force of personality to be able to do that kind of thing. And, you get detractors. I don't know anything about El Salvador. I mean, I've never even been there. Tron, you have. But from a
Yeah.
from an external observation point, I mean, when you're living in a world in which MS-13 is killing people left, right, up, and down, and then 3 years later, you get, your tourist economy has shot through the roof, and people are going there as a vacation destination, and they feel relatively safer than going to
Yeah.
Mexico, safer than going to other places. I
Yeah.
mean, must be doing something right.
Yeah, he was telling the story about, I guess, one of the MS-13 people escaped to Spain, and it was one of these guys that murdered multiple people, and they worked with Interpol and everything to basically capture him, and Spain did capture him ultimately, and they were kind of all proud of it, especially they'd captured him or whatever, and then they asked to have him, to bring him back so they could put him in their prison, and Spain wouldn't send him back. He said, that we're not sure that, it's human rights and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, what about the rights of the people who were murdered? What about the rights of the citizens to be safe and that kind of thing? And he said, look, we don't necessarily want him back, right? It's another mouth to feed. But it was just kind of an interesting take on it. Yeah. So he's still, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll check it out. I'll check it out.
I'm sorry, guys. I missed the tail end of that because I had to run upstairs and tell I have like a fife and drum band going on upstairs with all my.
Can't hear it. We can't hear it at all.
So just quick recap, although everybody else who's watching this has heard it now, but and can hopefully watch it again on the Tucker Bukele interview. But basically, there was a murderer that that was MS-13 that got captured by Spain, with Interpol's help and everything. And then they said they wouldn't return him to El Salvador because they were worried about his human rights. And Bukele is just sort of like, what about the human rights of the people who were murdered and the citizens and everything? He said, well, we'll take him and put him in the prison. Spain wouldn't send him back. He's like, all right, fine, keep him. We don't need to feed him. It's like, if you want to feed that mouth, that's fine. But just kind of the interesting. Yeah, you should watch it. It's worth watching.
Well, I will. Yeah, that sounds wow.
Do we dare venture down the path of what's going to happen with this upcoming election?
It's getting super interesting, right? We have the what happens on July 11th. Whether they
What's July 11th?
So July 11th is when they decide the what happens to Trump from his trial kind of thing. Prior to that or after that, we have the Supreme Court deciding on presidential immunity. We have the debate coming up on June 27th. So that ought to be interesting. They won't let RFK Jr. into the debate. They won't let an audience into the debate. They won't. I mean, it's just crazy. Yeah.
Almost like kabuki theater now, right? Like,
yeah.
What are we doing? Debates used to be debates, right? And
yeah,
if you had RFK, you can love him, you can not love him, whatever. I mean, he's got something like, what is it, 20%?
Yeah, no, I think they said, but at one point, I think if you were put all three up, that he was polling higher than two of them. In fact, there was at one point they said that the other candidates wouldn't necessarily qualify for CNN's debate under their rules, but RFK would, which was interesting. Yeah. So,
well, look, from a lawyer's perspective, right? Somebody who's actually interested in constitutional law, what fascinates me is the following question, right? Can a state, I mean, Vivek has this theory that he's put out on Twitter. I don't agree with it, but it's that there's an underlying predicate offense. There had to be an underlying crime that Trump was mischaracterizing the payments with respect to. And that underlying crime, one of the theories of the prosecution was that the underlying crime was a federal election violation, right? So Vivek's theory is that because of that, the federal pardoning power will govern and can be applied to that underlying state predicate act, he's wrong. The president can't pardon a state crime, even if an element of the state crime is a federal crime. He's wrong about that. But from a constitutional perspective, I'm like totally fascinated by the notion of the question: can can a state government incarcerate a federal the president of the United States during during that president's tenure? So from inauguration day until 4 years after inauguration day, can a state imprison the president? And I think the answer to that question is no. I don't think the states have the power to imprison a president during their elected tenure.
Does
And
the
I think we
president
made-
have the
Okay,
ability?
based on what?
Constitution. There has to be presidential immunity during the president's.
Well, that's the Supreme Court. That's the Supreme Court question. I mean,
Well, but that's not about
it's
incarceration. That's about whether the president can stand trial during the period of their presidency. I'm talking about something different. This president's already stood trial. This president's been convicted. If this judge gives Trump, say 1 year, which is unlikely, but right? And that year starts in November, and Trump gets elected, and Trump is in prison. In Rikers Island on inauguration day. I think from that day forward,
Dude, I'm looking forward to watching the Resolute desk be moved into the prison cell, all that kind of stuff, right?
Right. It just can't be, right? Because otherwise you could have scenarios in which like southern states tried to imprison President Lincoln during the Civil War. You just can't have that, right?
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
What? No, I'm saying you could have a scenario in which.
Oh, if they did.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Lincoln
Okay.
was hated, not only in the South. I mean, in New Jersey, my state, I remember I interned when I was younger at the Capitol, and there was this story in the Capitol building about when Lincoln gave a speech during the year prior to the Civil War, and the senators in New Jersey called him introduced him to the Senate as the ugliest man known to America, and they hated him in New Jersey. So you can conceive of a situation in which a state trumps up some charge, and which by the way is like a pun that makes sense now, right? Trumps up a charge against a sitting president and then tries to lock him up during the presidency. It just can't be that the Supreme Court can just never allow that. So we'll see. It'll be interesting.
Yeah. No, it seems like there's lots of these questions that are coming up that are just like, this is just so far. It feels, that living in a simulation thing. I mean, it's just.
Yeah. Well, the scary thing for me though is, I don't know. I feel like we lived in sort of an era of Leave It to Beaver growing up. And now it seems like all of our major institutions are being systematically delegitimized.
Yeah.
And the one that concerns me the most, I mean, we all don't really respect Congress anymore, right? I don't view that as a respectable profession. I don't. When I see somebody say that they're a lifelong politician, I don't feel that person is somebody that I need to look up to or respect.
Right, but that's part of your point, though, is because that has been delegitimized at this point.
Correct.
Yeah.
And what's the one that scares me though is the Supreme Court.
I
The one that's
me
not
too.
political, right? That's the one that's supposed to be. We all listen to those people in the robes because they're learned jurists and they've studied the law. And I fear that it's being, rapidly delegitimized now.
Yeah.
Me too. You've noticed the attacks ratchet up on
Yeah.
the Supreme Court. And I agree with you 100% because it always felt like at the end of the day, if things were going completely insane, you would still have the Supreme Court, which you may or may not agree with their decisions, but at least you did respect their decisions and respect that, like you said, these are learned people. These are not elected officials who have some political motivation, an agenda, or who are beholden to some, for-profit entity that, is giving them
Or be worried about getting fired.
or worry about getting fired or reelected.
Yeah.
So you did feel that way. And it concerns me as well, because I have noticed it seems that the rhetoric is starting to attack not just the Supreme Court as a whole, but individual justices, it seems like.
Mhm. Yep.
And it's again meant to undermine the legitimacy. And it's like, if we're going to undermine the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, then I agree with you, Doug. I feel like, wow, I think in really big trouble if that starts faltering on a large scale.
It's a little bit frightening. And if you think back, I mean, I always say this pendulum swing, right? And if you think back to, I mean, the Warren Court affected a sea change on constitutional law and invented constitutional doctrine that didn't exist, right? Miranda, we all have the right to remain silent. Guess what? Miranda rights don't appear anywhere in the Constitution, right? They supposedly come from the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments from an amalgamation of them. But in reality, it was just the court sort of invented the doctrine, right? Same thing with Roe, you know, emanated from penumbras of constitutional emanations. I mean, that's actually a quote, right? Or a paraphrase from the case. You know, just sort of created new constitutional doctrine. Some people loved it. Some people disliked it. You know, about 50% of the population on each side, whether they loved it or didn't love it, right? But nobody said we should pack the court and we should eliminate life tenure and we should put people out in front of Earl Warren's house with microphones and bullhorns, right? That's the thing that's crossed the line. And it's only really kind of happened twice in our constitutional history. Once during the Lochner era, which, you know, you remember the old court packing, maybe you don't, but there was a court packing exercise. FDR basically almost packed the court, and there was a switch in one judge's vote that switched sort of the tenor of where the court was going, made it less conservative and more progressive. And that was the end of that. So they didn't actually do it. And then now, but it seems to be sort of a tool in the progressive playbook that, you know, you don't like the decisions, so you instead of running the long game and, you know, electing people into office who are going to appoint judges that you agree with, you sort of take the short game. Let's just expand the size of the court and eliminate their tenure.
So when was the Lochner thing?
Because
Because that was like a switch in time. You mentioned that before. We talked about.
save the nine. That's the phrase.
Yeah.
Let me get you the exact date. I can Google it while we're talking here. 30s, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it's concerning. And, you know, it's interesting that we're talking about, like, you know, institutions, loss and trust, you know, these kinds of things. The presidential candidates that we have ahead of us, the primary candidates of Biden and Trump, you're kind of like, really, this is the best two we can come up with, you know, all of this. But yet our system is actually a little more resilient than maybe we think, because these things, I agree, they're all faltering, but the system is still kind of working. Not saying that it will in the future and it's guaranteed to work, but it's still working. Like, things are still working. There's still relative stability, you know, the economy, although not ideal, it's kind of weird, sending weird mixed messages, but it's still functioning. Like, it's interesting. It kind of also speaks to the resilience at the same time.
I don't have the exact date as I'm here, Tron, but it ended in the 30s.
Okay. All right. Because I was kind of born after the crazy 60s stuff that you see where, you know, there's people throwing tear gas and all that kind of stuff running around or whatever. And it seems like we have that now, right? So it's kind of like we're reliving through, you know, something that, you know, I never lived through. But, you know, people older than I am have lived through some of it.
How did we get through the 60s then? What happened? How did the nation kind of heal from all of that to move forward? What happened?
You mean from the 60s?
Yeah, from the 60s. Because I've heard the same, I've talked to my older brother and I've said, and this was actually a few years ago, not more recently, but I'm like, there just seems like there's so much divisiveness and this and that. He's like, oh, it was way worse in the 60s. 60s was way worse. But yet we seem to have somehow figured out how to get through that and past it. What happened? How did we do that? Because it seems like whatever medicine we had then, it's like we need that same dose of medicine now. And what is that medicine?
Ronald Reagan.
No, I'm not. I mean, I'd love to summon him back from the dead, but are you serious? Like, it was wrong. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Reagan, like, being like
In some ways.
Go ahead, Tron.
Well, in some, I mean, we had the interest rate things. Interest rates for homes was, you know, in the 70s was like 17% and things like that. When my parents bought a house, it was like 17% interest.
The economy went to hell in a handbasket, and Ronald Reagan came on scene. Look, I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 74, and I grew up in the 80s. My earliest memories of Ronald Reagan, they were good memories. I had good memories of our political life. Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill got along. They were political rivals, but you know, in peace friends. And there was just the discourse was different. It wasn't coarsened. And you know, that carried itself clear through to, you know, Bush and through to even Clinton, you know. And then I don't know when it changed. It just started to change. Just seems like we're you can't, we live in a society now where if you disagree with someone, it means that you hate them. I don't feel that way, but I feel like others do.
Yeah, have you seen the some of the governors have come out, Utah Governor Cox has also come out that this campaign called Disagree Better,
Yeah.
where they have these commercials where they're sitting down across from a table with like a Republican and Democrat, and they're like, hey, they do a commercial saying basically that, like, hey, we disagree on a lot of politics and things, but we don't hate each other. We can still have a conversation. We still like each other. We can still, all of that. And the idea is, hey, it's okay to disagree, but let's disagree better so it's not tearing families apart and friends apart and this and that. And I
Yeah.
felt like it's a really good message, but it's been interesting. I've heard other people who have just been like really critical of that idea of like, no. You don't disagree better. Like, to make change, you have to be aggressive. You have to have that anger and aggression behind it to make change. If you're just being like politely disagreeing, then you're not going to get what it is that you want. And
that's the difference between, I mean, that's what leads to totalitarianism on either side of the political spectrum, right? I mean, that the opening scene for Three Body Problem. Did you guys watch this show?
I did most of it. I haven't finished it.
Yeah, I mean, the opening scene with the Cultural Revolution.
Yes.
I did see the first episode. Yeah.
That can happen. It's not, we think that these things can't happen, that we're divorced from them, that these are just, fictional exercises or thought experiments about how humanity can go downhill quickly. It happened, right? There were billions of people that one day woke up in China and their friends and neighbors all of a sudden were, putting them to a litmus test of their ideological beliefs. And if they didn't pass that test, they got killed. These
Parents
things.
and kids even.
What's that, Jeremy?
We weren't kids even turning their parents in as well.
Yes.
So that's interesting.
Every fiber of our being. That's what differentiates us. And we've lost it. We've lost the thread. People don't disagree well anymore in this country.
And that example is politics inserting itself between family and right. I mean, that's exactly what happens, or loved ones and friends and this and that. And that's why I do think it is so important to figure out how to get through our problems, because that ruptures and tears the fabric of society. I mean, to me, there is legitimately a true fabric of society that exists. And, things like that are ruptures in that fabric that begin to tear it apart.
Well, you know what that fabric is from my perspective? That fabric is the notion that you can disagree, right? That's why we have a First Amendment. The First Amendment doesn't say you have to agree with this or you have to agree with that. It says you have the freedom to agree or disagree with anything you want. That's our religion in this country. Our religion is that anybody can say what they think. Anybody has the right to believe in the God that they want to believe in, or not believe in God at all. Everybody has the ability and right to speak truth to power, to petition your government.
Just not on certain social media platforms.
But that's what I need. And it really, like, it's tragic. And look, I bucket as much as I grew up in a family where we didn't have verboten subjects, right? We didn't say you can't talk about politics. You can't talk at the dinner table. You can't talk about business at the dinner. You can't talk about religion at the dinner. We talked about all of it and we all disagreed. And we never threw anything at each other, right? We used our words, and when we were done, we all hugged each other. And I try as hard as I can to instill that into my children. And I'm like the world's leading contrarian. So whenever they stake out a position at the dinner table, I take the opposite position just to teach them that there are people that disagree with them. Because there aren't a lot anymore. And they're a little microcosm, their little subculture. It seems to me that there's a lot of groupthink and they all think the same. What scares the shit out of me. Because I'm going to be in a nursing home and those ones are the ones running the country.
Well, it turns out Harvard was the worst when it was ranked at that.
Yeah, and
ranked absolute last.
Isn't that just tragic, right?
Yeah, it is.
But I don't know. It's old codgers like us that need to stand in the way of it, and you just all of us have our own little spheres of influence, and they're either one person or two people or your family or your extended family or your town or your county or state or whatever it may be. Some have more than others, but you influence by being who you are. You know, and thinking what you want to think. I just it scares me to have this environment. Like I had friends over the weekend, the dear friends, stay in my house, and you know, one of them is has very adamant beliefs about his sort of political philosophy, and I could tell within 10 seconds of the conversation, it's like this is going nowhere. Like,
Meaning it's at odds with your philosophy.
no, but I love debating people who disagree with me. Love it.
Right.
I
But
was getting the distinct impression that if we continued to have a debate, that he would get angry.
okay.
I don't get
Yeah.
angry at anything. You know, it takes a lot to get me angry about politics, especially.
Well, the irony is that we all like to think we're open-minded, but I don't know if we really are. And, you know, but have you, because that's the thing, like you get into an argument, rarely people's minds ever get changed, ever, right? That
Nope.
just
Yeah.
doesn't happen. All it does, it causes people to dig their heels in more to reinforce their positions
Yeah.
even harder.
I enjoy the
So
discussions though.
I enjoy the discussions too,
So,
but not everyone feels
guys,
that way.
but
Yeah.
I sharpen. That's how I formulated my views in life. That's how I sharpened my views in life, was by debating people that completely disagreed with me. I don't know. I love it. I love it. Now, does it change my mind? Not often, but sometimes. Yeah, I've changed my mind on some things that would surprise you that I changed my mind on over time, because of taking into account other people's points of view.
Have either of you ever read The Righteous Mind? Have we talked about this?
No.
I have it, and I've read some of it. I have not finished it.
So it's by a social psychologist named Jonathan Haidt. And the subtitle is, so it's The Righteous Mind, and it's like why good people disagree about religion and politics.
Mhm.
But the bluff, or the TLDR, is basically there's a factor of us, actually, the way we're born, we're going to value certain things higher than other things. And those who tend to be left or progressive or liberal, not classical liberal, but liberal, tend to value fairness and justice, those two values, like by far the highest, the most. Like those are the only two things that matter. If you're conservative or right or this and that, you tend to also value fairness and justice, but you also value authority, purity, and history, like your can't think of the word, but your heritage, right? Kind of the history, like of that. So they tend to value those 5 value systems evenly. And so what happens when you get a left and a right person talking, they're actually speaking from different value systems. So that's why they can speak and use the same language, but they can't hear each other because they're arguing from different positions of values. And that's his point. But the thing that's interesting about it is that you actually see this throughout all sorts of different societies around the world. So there's like a genetic component to this, that we're kind of born certain leaning to these certain value systems, but that we also need each other. It's that, and we've actually evolved as a species because we have these kind of two sides that will kind of counter with each other, because you do need the one side that's going to always kind of push things forward, always pushing things forward. You do need that. But yet, if they push forward with everything all the time super fast, you actually get a really unstable society, right? Because the society doesn't adjust fast enough, and it's too fast, and it's too much, and it's sometimes wild ideas that go off the rails and all of that. But then you have the right or conservative side, and the idea is that that provides that kind of stability, that resistance to change. No, this is the way we've always done it. And what that does is it kind of controls that speed at which the changes happen, and make sure things don't go too off the rails and too crazy. And so as much as the sides oppose each other and fight with each other, we actually need each other, because there are progressive ideas and things that have happened that we absolutely are better for it. But also there are a lot of bad ideas that have happened, that came up, that also the brakes were put on by the conservative side too. So it's one of those things where it's a balance that we need each other, but yet both sides get very angry. And that's the thing about that book that points out, hey, everyone's good people, but they still disagree, but we actually, in a weird way, again, still need each other in this. It's a great book. I highly recommend it.
See,
Interesting.
I'll take a look at that book. I view the world in a binary way, but I view it in a different dialectic. My worldview is that there are two kinds of people in the world. Those who feel comfortable imposing their view on others, and those who feel comfortable attempting to persuade others without imposing their views. And if you think about it, right, even societies break down along this dialectic, right? Authoritarianism of all stripes, whether it's, you know, on the left or the right, it comes from that place. That's you can have an authoritarian regime on the far left and an authoritarian regime on the far right. And the common thread between the two is they're run by an individual or a group of people who feel comfortable imposing their will on others. Then there are societies like democracies where the whole, you know, sort of notion of a democracy, we don't have pure democracies, but if we did, I mean, you know, back in ancient Greece, right? I mean, the notion of a democracy was that we are all equals and we have the right to talk to each other about stuff. But we don't have the right to impose our will on others. That's kind of how I view the world. And it seems like there's a lot more of the totalitarian, authoritarian group now than there was that I can remember at any point in time in my life. And it's on both sides of the spectrum. This isn't about left or right. This is just about personalities. Like, dude, I'm a 50-year-old man. I've been around the block. I have seen things. I've done things. I've read probably more than many, right, in my life. Don't tell me how to think, please, right? You can tell me what you think, and I may agree, but don't tell me how to think for myself. And there just seems to be a lot of that going on now. I mean, you've got Elon Musk, one of the richest people in the world. Do you know how many people sort of look at him and like think that their worldview is superior to his? Right? You know, if you think your worldview is superior to Elon Musk's, good for you, but maybe like think about the fact that what this man has done. Right? I mean, he wakes up one day and says, I want to drill holes, and he makes a boring company. Then he says, I want to shoot rockets off to Mars. He makes a rocket company. Then he says, I want to tackle climate change. I'm going to make a battery car company. He makes a battery car company. I mean, he's not exactly a slouch, right? So if you're starting the conversation from the perspective of, I know more than him and he should shut up, you may be the problem. And I think there are a lot of people out there that feel that way. Now, I don't agree with everything Elon Musk says, but I at least give him and everybody else in the conversation the benefit of the doubt. I do not start conversations with people thinking I'm superior and they're an idiot. Even if I'm more educated than they are, even if I actually may be an expert on a subject that they're not, okay? I don't approach things from that perspective. It seems like the world is starting to approach things from that perspective more and more and more and more, to where like you're dumb if you question X. You know, don't question the mask, put the mask on. Don't question the shot, put the shot on your arm. Don't question climate change. Don't question this. Don't question that. I don't care what the topic is. If you're not questioning it, you're doing something wrong. You're supposed to question it. Skepticism is the essence of science. It's the essence of democracy. Right? So I
agree with most of that. I agree with most of that. I think maybe it's because you're still young. And I'm just kidding. Yeah.
Touche.
So I just think I think there's a lot of manipulation of thought, right? That's kind of coming out. And I think for people who are kind of following that, not recognizing that, I think it's manipulating some. And maybe both on both sides, but that's creating this division. And so I see that as probably the worst problem, that if we could solve that, the manipulation, like actual untruths being broadcast, I think we could solve this quicker.
It's a hard problem. And the reason I think that problem is so hard to solve is because it is a fact that 50% of people, 1 out of every 2 people, has an IQ of 100 or less. There are a lot of people out there that don't understand your words. They speak the same language that you do. They look like you, but they are not capable of understanding the nuance of what you're saying. Now, 100 is an average IQ, but talk about somebody with a 70 IQ. Nothing wrong with somebody with a 70 IQ, but they are not understanding things the same way that you are. Right? And that type of mind is prone to manipulation. I mean, it just is in a way
Right.
that I think, maybe people on the higher end of the IQ spectrum are not. It's true. It's true. And that's how you get masses of people believing in a dogma.
Yes, but it feels like it's a coordinated manipulation, right? So there are people potentially with higher IQs, don't know, doing that manipulation, right? So that needs to be fixed or solved.
Well, here's
Yeah,
what happens when AI starts doing it.
Agree. And I read this recently. Those actually sometimes with higher IQs are more easily duped because they think they are so smart, right?
Maybe.
And so
Maybe
it's
that's
not
right.
just, yeah, it can go both ways, I think. I don't know the answer. I think other than let's create a ministry of information. And all
And Jeremy's in charge of it. Now, how about that woman from the New Zealand Prime Minister? Jacinda, whatever her name was. Put her in.
I didn't hear what did you say?
That woman from New Zealand, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, she was like the worst during COVID, like the worst conceivable, public employee. She was like basically, I mean, I don't remember any specific examples, but she was basically like, if you don't have the shot, you're not a member of society. And, like just real extreme. And you could totally tell she was the kind of person that would like love to have a Ministry of Information where she got to control what did. But yeah, I mean, look, maybe IQ is the wrong way to break it down, but I do think of things in those terms. Like, I wonder, and this isn't some sort of intellectually elitist comment. It really isn't. It's just, there are people out there that say things that I don't understand. Not a lot of them. There are some people out there that say things that I can't comprehend. Right? Somebody's solving the Poincare conjecture. Like that guy, that Russian guy that, turned down the Fields Medal and the $1 million for solving the Poincare conjecture. Like, he probably has thoughts that I just can't understand. And he's probably 30 IQ points higher than me, right? So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of people out there. There's billions. There are billions of people in this world who are at an IQ level where they kind of don't fully grasp all the nuance of the things that are going on around them. Like, talk about monetary theory. They're not thinking about monetary theory. They're thinking about what chicken or soup they're going to get next week.
Well, I think that's true of a lot of people, even if they're just busy, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's most people are busy enough that they can't think about those kind of things. There's just too much, and
yeah, I mean, look, we live in a society in which we have the ability or capacity to be manipulated pretty easily now. I mean, I just seem like we had to, like, before you had to seek out information, it wasn't like blaring in your face all day long. When at least when I felt when I was growing up, like you went to the library and you got your books. Like
or you went to the 3 channels and they all said the same thing, and so there was no counterpoint.
You had the ability to get information in a slow trickle kind of way when you sought it out, right? You went to the library, you picked out the book that you wanted. But now you pull up your phone and you have a feed that's blasting information in your face. And it's algorithmically designed to blast certain information in your face, depending on what the company wants to serve to you and what you like, theoretically.
Yeah, amplify your own views back to you.
Right. I don't know. I don't know if that's a good thing, because it's like a constant barrage of polarizing information.
Well,
Yep.
and this is one thing I wish Twitter did have, or X did have, where like if I'm on YouTube, for example, and for some reason my feed starts getting stuff, I'm like, I don't want any of this. I actually will go back to my history and search, and I'll be like, what made it think that I am interested in this? I'll go back and actually delete.
Yeah.
to retrain the algorithm so I'm not getting stuff I really am not interested in, right? You can't do that as far as I know on X. So what happens is that I start getting feeds sometimes, and I'm like, honestly, I don't even know where some of it's coming in. I'm like, I actually don't want this. I don't know. I guess I can block the individuals. Maybe that's what would train it. But there's no way for me to go back and say, you know what? Unview this, unview that, or whatever I was scrolling through. And I happened to, someone talked to me and I happened to pause on that video and I looked over, and then it thinks I'm interested in it. I don't know. Like, if it would be nice if there's a way to do that, because I would, like to get information that I'm more interested in. But on the other side, something I do, because we're all in tech, we're aware that what's happening in the background of that content. Like, we're aware of what the algorithm is doing, right? So we're gonna be, I think, a little more sensitive to, okay, that what's it doing, what's it feeding me. I will actually use Google Newsfeed, which also has an algorithm to curate content across a variety of sources. And I explicitly even go into areas that I know are opposite of some of the views I have, just so I can understand what's the dialogue happening over there,
Yeah.
or it's their reason. Because to your point, Doug, I don't think people are just generally like a bunch of idiots, right? I mean, there are a variety of IQs, but I think if we say, hey, that side is an idiot because they believe that, I think that's a mistake, because what it does, it delegitimizes their point of view. Like, that they may have a legitimate point of view that is rooted in something that is important to them. And we can never understand or listen if we just immediately write people off as saying, they're idiots, right? They're just dumb. How can they believe this? How can they be so stupid? You will never build a bridge or understand a different point of view if you just write
It's an
everything off.
arrogance. It's an unearned arrogance that people just don't have the right to have.
Agree. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an issue, and I get the same thing, right? So the feedback loop, I obviously I'm in crypto, so I, have a lot of sort of libertarian leaning people in my thread, and I like it. People talking about monetary theory and this and that, but then once in a while you get like kill the tranny, and it's like like I don't want that, I want to have a way to put it off, and I don't. They don't give us those tools, and it's sort of I mean I don't understand how the algorithm thinks that believing in sort of a libertarian philosophy, which is sort of the essence of freedom, live and let people fly their flag and be who they are, like, means that I would like to see gay bashing and trans bashing, and which I don't. And it's sort of being spoon fed to me. So imagine now I'm a 50-year-old guy who's been around the block, and I have my own brain and I can think through these issues for myself. But imagine a 17-year-old or 15-year-old kid who's still formulating their mind. They get fed this stuff. It's sort of like, like feeding kids Nazi propaganda. And then it changes the structure of their brain. It changes how they think. It changes and can, sort of permanently impact how they view the world. So it is. And I think that's a big polarizing effect. That may be the cause of the thing that we were talking about. I mean, all of us feel it, right? We feel that polarizing effect and can't quite put our finger on what's causing it. That might be it. Yeah.
Well, guys, I do need to go. I have some.
We did cocktails and no crypto tonight.
We talked some.
Some.
Did we? I don't remember.
Yeah, well, maybe next time. There's obviously some things going on. I saw Biden did not sign the accounting rule change around crypto.
Yeah.
I forgot that one.
Well, he vetoed it.
Or vetoed it.
He vetoed it, the SAB 121.
121.
Which he said he would do, but then crypto kind of entered the political arena a little bit, right? To the point where Trump was kind of supporting it and that kind of thing. RFK always has. But there was an expectation, because I listened to a bunch of podcasts in between that kind of political wind shift and the vetoing. There was kind of expectation that he would not veto it, because it was really to as a disadvantage. I mean, there's probably, I mean, there's a lot of single issue voters that
Well,
will
I'm
look at that.
sure he thought it all the way through very thoroughly and understood crypto very well and decided that was not the right move.
Yep.
Yeah.
Turned around and tried to find the exit.
Trying to find the door.
Yeah. It's just
Right.
become a political issue. I think, you know, this election will be the last election in which it's a major political issue.
Crypto.
Yeah. Yeah. We all know who made it a political issue. It was one person.
Yeah.
And that one senator turned it into a political issue and for no reason. And you know, I think this is the last election in which that will be the case.
The one that was supposedly pro people too, which was kind of like a really bizarre thing.
I think we're going to win. I do. I think we're going to win. I think it's going to be accepted here. I think it will get past all this. But I think we're going to win. I think there are too many people that are behind it. And quite frankly, you know, the big money has joined in the fight too. They seem to be pro for it. But at the end of the day, I think that's what will happen. I don't know what exactly it will look like, but I do think we're going to win this fight.
My main concern is that then what's the consequence of that? Does that mean the lion, you know, we basically put a lion in a cage and look at it and call it a lion? It's not a lion if it's in a cage, right? So,
Right.
I mean, I hope we don't end up in a situation where Bitcoin becomes this sort of centrally controlled asset in 4, you know, giant funds, and then they rehypothecate their share interests in the Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin ends up not being what it was designed to be. You know, freedom money. So we'll see, but
Well, Ravencoin's waiting in the wings if
there
necessary.
you go. There you go.
Well done.
Great. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Doug.
Next month, see you guys, and
Okay.
we'll
We'll talk soon.
talk some
Do it
crypto.
again.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Right. Bye-bye.